The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 13. Bryce is asked a question. Mitchington stepped aside into a private room, motioning Bryce to follow him. He carefully closed the door and, looking significantly at his companion, repeated his last words with a shake of the head. "Poisoned, without the very least doubt," he whispered. "Hydrocyanic acid, which I understand is the same thing as what's commonly called prussic acid. They say they hadn't the least difficulty in finding that out, so there you are." "That's what Coates has told you, of course?" asked Bryce. "After the autopsy?" "Both of 'em told me, Coates and Everest, who helped him," replied Mitchington. "They said it was obvious from the very start, and I say—" "Well?" said Bryce. "It wasn't in that tin bottle, anyway," remarked Mitchington, who was evidently greatly weighted with mystery. "No, of course it wasn't," affirmed Bryce. "Good heavens, man, I know that." "How do you know?" asked Mitchington. "Because I poured a few drops from that bottle into my hand when I first found Collishaw and tasted the stuff," answered Bryce readily. "Cold tea, with too much sugar in it. There was no HCN in that, besides, wherever it is, there's always a smell stronger or fainter of bitter almonds. There was none about that bottle." "Yet you were very anxious that we should take care of the bottle," observed Mitchington. "Of course, because I suspected the use of some much rarer poison than that," retorted Bryce. "Pooh, it's a clumsy way of poisoning anybody, quick though it is." "Well, there's where it is," said Mitchington. "That'll be the medical evidence at the inquest, anyway. That's how it was done. And the question now is—" "Who did it?" interrupted Bryce. "Precisely. Well, I'll say this much at once, Mitchington. Whoever did it was either a big bungler or damned clever. That's what I say." "I don't understand you," said Mitchington. "Plain enough, my meaning," replied Bryce, smiling. "To finish anybody with that stuff is easy enough, but no poison is more easily detected. It's an amateurish way of poisoning anybody, unless you can do it in such a fashion that no suspicion can attach you to. And in this case, it's here. Whoever administered that poison to Collishaw must have been certain, absolutely certain, mind you, that it was impossible for anyone to find out that he'd done so. Therefore, I'd say what I said. The man must be damned clever. Otherwise he'd be found out pretty quick. And all that puzzles me is, how was it administered?" "How much would kill anybody pretty quick?" asked Mitchington. "How much? 1 drop would cause instantaneous death," answered Bryce. "Cause paralysis of the heart, there and then, instantly." Mitchington remained silent a while, looking meditatively at Bryce. Then he turned to a locked drawer, produced a key, and took something out of the drawer, a small object wrapped in paper. "I'm telling you a good deal, Doctor," he said, "but as you know so much already, I'll tell you a bit more. Look at this." He opened his hand and showed Bryce a small cardboard pill-box, across the face of which a few words were written: "One after meals, Mr. Collishaw." "Whose handwriting's that?" demanded Mitchington. Bryce looked closer and started. "Ransford's," he muttered. "Ransford, of course." "That box was in Collishaw's waistcoat pocket," said Mitchington. "There are pills inside it now. See." He took off the lid of the box and revealed 4 sugar-coated pills. "It wouldn't hold more than 6, this," he observed. Bryce extracted a pill and put his nose to it after scratching a little of the sugar coating away. "Mere digestive pills," he announced. "Could it have been given in one of these?" asked Mitchington. "Possible," replied Bryce. He stood thinking for a moment. "Have you shown those things to Coates and Everest?" he asked at last. "Not yet," replied Mitchington. I wanted to find out first if Ransford gave this box to Collishaw and when. I'm going to Collishaw's house presently. I've certain inquiries to make. His widow'll know about these pills." "You're suspecting Ransford," said Bryce. "That's certain." Mitchington carefully put away the pill box and relocked the drawer. "I've got some decidedly uncomfortable ideas, which I'd much rather not have, about Dr. Ransford," he said. "When one thing seems to fit into another, what is one to think? If I were certain that that rumour which spread about Collishaw's knowledge of something, had got to Ransford's ears, why, I should say it looked very much as if Ransford wanted to stop Collishaw's tongue for good before it could say more, and next time, perhaps, something definite. If men once begin to hint that they know something, they don't stop at hinting. Collishaw might have spoken plainly before long. To us." Bryce asked a question about the holding of the inquest and went away. After thinking things over, he turned in the direction of the cathedral and made his way through the cloisters to the close. He was going to make another move in his own game, while there was a good chance. Everything at this juncture was throwing excellent cards into his hand. He would be foolish, he thought, not to play them to advantage. And so he made straight for Ransford's house, and before he reached it, met Ransford and Mary Bewery, who were crossing the close from another point, on their way from the railway station, whither Mary had gone especially to meet her guardian. They were in such deep conversation that Bryce was close upon them before they observed his presence. When Ransford saw his late assistant, he scowled unconsciously. Bryce, and the interview of the previous afternoon, had been much in his thoughts all day, and he had an uneasy feeling that Bryce was playing some game. Bryce was quick to see that scowl, and to observe the sudden start which Mary could not repress, and he was just as quick to speak. "I was going to your house, Dr. Ransford," he remarked quietly. "I don't want to force my presence on you, now or at any time, but I think you'd better give me a few minutes." They were at Ransford's garden gate by that time, and Ransford flung it open and motioned Bryce to follow. He led the way into the dining room, closed the door on the three, and looked at Bryce. Bryce took the glance as a question, and put another in words. "You've heard of what's happened during the day?" he said. "About Collishaw, yes," answered Ransford. "Miss Bewery has just told me what her brother told her." "What of it?" "I have just come from the police station," said Bryce. "Coates and Everest have carried out an autopsy this afternoon. Mitchington told me the result." "Well?" demanded Ransford, with no attempt to conceal his impatience. "And what then?" "Collishaw was poisoned," replied Bryce, watching Ransford with a closeness which Mary did not fail to observe. "HCN. No doubt at all about it." "Well, and what then?" asked Ransford, still more impatiently. "To be explicit, what's all this to do with me?" "I came here to do you a service," answered Bryce. "Whether you like to take it or not is your lookout. You may as well know it. You're in danger. Collishaw is the man who hinted, as you heard yesterday in my rooms, that he could say something definite about the Braden affair. If he liked." "Well?" said Ransford. "It's known to the police that you were at Collishaw's house early this morning," said Bryce. "Mitchington knows it." Ransford laughed. "Does Mitchington know that I overheard what he said to you yesterday afternoon?" he inquired. "No, he doesn't," answered Bryce. "He couldn't possibly know unless I told him. I haven't told him. I'm not going to tell him. But he's suspicious already." "Of me, of course," suggested Ransford, with another laugh. He took a turn across the room and suddenly faced round on Bryce, who had remained standing near the door. "Do you really mean to tell me that Mitchington is such a fool as to believe that I would poison a poor working man, and in that clumsy fashion?" he burst out. "Of course you don't." "I never said I did," answered Bryce. I'm only telling you what Mitchington thinks his ground for suspecting. He confided in me because, well, it was I who found Collishaw. Mitchington is in possession of a box of digestive pills, which you evidently gave Collishaw." "Bah!" exclaimed Ransford. "The man's a fool. Let him come and talk to me." "He won't do that yet," said Bryce. "But I'm afraid he'll bring all this out at the inquest. The fact is, he's suspicious, what with one thing or another, about the former affair. He thinks you conceal the truth, whatever it may be, as regards any knowledge of Braden which you may or mayn't have." "I'll tell you what it is," said Ransford suddenly. "It just comes to this. I'm suspected of having had a hand, the hand, if you like, in Braden's death, and now of getting rid of Collishaw because Collishaw could prove that I had that hand. That's about it." "A clear way of putting it, certainly," assented Bryce. "But there is a very clear way, too, of dissipating any such ideas." "What way?" demanded Ransford. "If you do know anything about the Braden affair, why not reveal it, and be done with the whole thing?" suggested Bryce. "That would finish matters." Ransford took a long, silent look at his questioner, and Bryce looked steadily back, and Mary Bewery anxiously watched both men. "That's my business," said Ransford at last. "I'm neither to be coerced, bullied, or cajoled. I'm obliged to you for giving me a hint of my danger, I suppose, and I don't propose to say any more." "Neither do I," said Bryce. "I only came to tell you." And therewith, having successfully done all that he wanted to do, he walked out of the room and the house, and Ransford, standing in the window, his hands thrust in his pockets, watched him go away across the close. "Guardian," said Mary softly. Ransford turned sharply. "Wouldn't it be best," she continued, speaking nervously, if you do know anything about that unfortunate man, if you told it? Why have this suspicion fastening itself on you? You!" Ransford made an effort to calm himself. He was furiously angry, angry with Bryce, angry with Mitchington, angry with the cloud of foolishness and stupidity that seemed to be gathering. "Why should I? Supposing that I do know something, which I don't admit, why should I allow myself to be coerced and frightened by these fools?" he asked. "No man can prevent suspicion falling on him. It's my bad luck in this instance. Why should I rush to the police station and say, 'Here, I'll blurt out all I know, everything'? Why?" "Wouldn't that be better than knowing that people are saying things?" she asked. "As to that," replied Ransford, "you can't prevent people saying things, especially in a town like this. If it hadn't been for the unfortunate fact that Braden came to the surgery door, nothing would have been said. But what of that? I have known hundreds of men in my time, aye, and forgotten them. No, I am not going to fall a victim to this device. It all springs out of curiosity. As to this last affair, it's all nonsense." "But if the man was really poisoned?" suggested Mary. "Let the police find the poisoner," said Ransford, with a grim smile. "That's their job." Mary said nothing for a moment, and Ransford moved restlessly about the room. "I don't trust that fellow Bryce," he said suddenly. "He's up to something. I don't forget what he said when I bundled him out that morning." "What?" she asked. "That he would be a bad enemy," answered Ransford. "He's posing now as a friend, but a man's never to be so much suspected as when he comes doing what you may call unnecessary acts of friendship. I'd rather that anybody was mixed up in my affairs, your affairs, than Pemberton Bryce." "So would I," she said, "but—" She paused there a moment and then looked appealingly at Ransford. "I do wish you'd tell me what you promised to tell me," she said. "You know what I mean, about me and Dick. Somehow, I don't quite know how or why, I've an uneasy feeling that Bryce knows something, and that he's mixing it all up with this. Why not tell me, please?" Ransford, who was still marching about the room, came to a halt and leaning his hands on the table between them, looked earnestly at her. "Don't ask me that now," he said. "I can't yet. The fact is, I'm waiting for something, some particulars. As soon as I get them, I'll speak to you and to Dick. In the meantime, don't ask me again, and don't be afraid. And as to this affair, leave it to me. And if you meet Bryce again, refuse to discuss anything with him. Look here, there's only one reason why he professes friendliness and a desire to save me annoyance. He thinks he can ingratiate himself with you." "Mistaken," murmured Mary, shaking her head. "I don't trust him. And less than ever because of yesterday. Would an honest man have done what he did? Let that police inspector talk freely, as he did, with people concealed behind a curtain? And he laughed about it. I hated myself for being there, yet could we help it?" "I'm not going to hate myself on Pemberton Bryce's account," said Ransford. "Let him play his game. That he has one, I'm certain." Bryce had gone away to continue his game, or another line of it. The Collyshaw matter had not made him forget the Richard Jenkins tomb, and now, after leaving Ransford's house, he crossed the Close to Paradise with the object of doing a little more investigation. But at the archway of the ancient enclosure he met old Simpson Harker, pottering about in his usual apparently aimless fashion. Harker smiled at sight of Bryce. "Ah, I was wanting to have a word with you, Doctor," he said. "Something important. Have you got a minute or two to spare, sir? Come round to my little place, then. We shall be quiet there." Bryce had any amount of time to spare for an interesting person like Harker, and he followed the old man to his house, a tiny place set in a nest of similar old-world buildings behind the Close. Harker led him into a little parlour, comfortable and snug, wherein were several shelves of books, of a curiously legal and professional-looking aspect, some old pictures, and a cabinet of odds and ends, stowed away in a dark corner. The old man motioned him to an easy-chair, and going over to a cupboard, produced a decanter of whisky and a box of cigars. "We can have a peaceful and comfortable talk here, Doctor," he remarked, as he sat down near Bryce, after fetching glasses and soda-water. "I live all alone, like a hermit. My bit of work's done by a woman who looks in of a morning. So we're all here by ourselves. Light your cigar. Same as that I gave you at Barthorpe. Well now," he continued, as Bryce settled down to listen. "There's a question I want to put to you, strictly between ourselves. Strictest of confidence, you know. It was you who was called to Braden by Varner, and you were left alone with Braden's body?" "Well," admitted Bryce, suddenly growing suspicious. "What of it?" Harker edged his chair a little closer to his guest's and leaned towards him. "What?" he asked in a whisper. "What have you done with that scrap of paper that you took out of Braden's purse?" End of chapter 13.
The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 14. From the Past. If any remarkably keen and able observer of the odd characteristics of humanity had been present in Harker's little parlour at that moment, watching him and his visitor, he would have been struck by what happened when the old man put this sudden and point-blank question to the young one. For Harker put the question, though in a whisper, in no more than a casual, almost friendly, confidential way, and Bryce never showed by the start of a finger or the flicker of an eyelash that he felt it to be what he really knew it to be, the most surprising and startling question he had ever had put to him. Instead, he looked his questioner calmly in the eyes and put a question in his turn. "Who are you, Mr. Harker?" asked Bryce quietly. Harker laughed, almost gleefully. "Yes, you've a right to ask that," he said. "Of course. Glad you take it that way. You'll do." "I'll qualify it then," added Bryce. "It's not who, it's what are you?" Harker waved his cigar at the bookshelves in front of which his visitor sat. "Take a look at my collection of literature, Doctor," he said. What do you think of it?" Bryce turned and leisurely inspected one shelf after another. "Seems to consist of little else but criminal cases and legal handbooks," he remarked quietly. "I begin to suspect you, Mr. Harker. They say here in Rochester that you're a retired tradesman. I think you're a retired policeman of the detective branch." Harker laughed again. "No Rochester man has ever crossed my threshold since I came to settle down here," he said. "You're the first person I've ever asked in, with one notable exception. I've never even had Campany, the librarian, here. I'm a hermit." "But you were a detective," suggested Bryce. "Aye, for a good 25 years," replied Harker. "And pretty well known, too, sir. But my question, Doctor, all between ourselves." "I'll ask you one, then," said Bryce. "How do you know I took a scrap of paper from Braden's purse?" "Because I know that he had such a paper in his purse the night he came to the Mitre," answered Harker, "and was certain to have it there next morning, and because I also know that you were left alone with the body for some minutes after Varner fetched you to it, and that when Braden's clothing and effects were searched by Mitchington, the paper wasn't there. So of course you took it. Doesn't matter to me that you did, except that I know from knowing that you're on a similar game to my own, which is why you went down to Leicestershire." "You knew Braden?" asked Bryce. "I knew him," answered Harker. "You saw him, spoke with him, here in Rochester?" suggested Bryce. "He was here, in this room, in that chair, from 5 minutes past 9 to close on 10 o'clock, the night before his death," replied Harker. Bryce, who was quietly appreciating the Havana cigar which the old man had given him, picked up his glass, took a drink, and settled himself in his easy-chair as if he meant to stay there a while. "I think we'd better talk confidentially, Mr. Harker," he said. "Precisely what we are doing, Dr. Bryce," replied Harker. "All right, my friend," said Bryce laconically. "Now we understand each other. So, do you know who John Braden really was?" "Yes," replied Harker promptly. "He was in reality John Brake, ex-bank manager, ex-convict." "Do you know if he has any relatives here in Rochester?" inquired Bryce. "Yes," said Harker. "The boy and girl who live with Ransford. They're Brake's son and daughter." "Did Brake know that when he came here?" continued Bryce. "No, he didn't. He hadn't the least idea of it," responded Harker. "Had you, then?" asked Bryce. "No, not until later. A little later," replied Harker. "You found it out at Barthorpe?" suggested Bryce. "Not a bit of it. I worked it out here, after Brake was dead," said Harker. "I went to Barthorpe on quite different business. Brake's business." "Ah," said Bryce. He looked the old detective quietly in the eyes. "You'd better tell me all about it," he added. "If we're both going to tell each other all about it," stipulated Harker. "That's settled," assented Bryce. Harker smoked thoughtfully for a moment and seemed to be thinking. "I'd better go back to the beginning," he said. "But first, what do you know about Brake? I know you went down to Barthorpe to find out what you could. How far did your searches take you?" "I know that Brake married a girl from Braden Medworth, that he took her to London, where he was manager of a branch bank, that he got into trouble and was sentenced to 10 years penal servitude," answered Bryce, "together with some small details into which we needn't go at present." "Well, as long as you know all that, there's a common basis and a common starting point," remarked Harker. "So I'll begin at Brake's trial. It was I who arrested Brake. There was no trouble, no bother. He'd been taken unawares by an inspector of the bank. He'd a considerable deficiency. Couldn't make it good. Couldn't or wouldn't explain, except by half-sullen hints that he'd been cruelly deceived. There was no defense. couldn't be. His counsel said that he could— "I've read the account of the trial," interrupted Bryce. "All right. Then you know as much as I can tell you on that point," said Harker. "He got, as you say, 10 years. I saw him just before he was removed, and asked him if there was anything I could do for him about his wife and children. I'd never seen them. I arrested him at the bank, and of course he was never out of custody after that. He answered in a queer, curt way that his wife and children were being looked after. I heard incidentally that his wife had left home, or was from home. There was something mysterious about it, either as soon as he was arrested or before. Anyway, he said nothing, and from that moment I never set eyes on him again until I met him in the street here in Rochester the other night, when he came to the Mitre. I knew him at once, and he knew me. We met under one of those big standard lamps in the marketplace. I was following my usual practice of having an evening walk last thing before going to bed, and we stopped and stared at each other. Then he came forward with his hand out, and we shook hands. "This is an odd thing," he said. "You're the very man I wanted to find. Come somewhere where it's quiet, and let me have a word with you." So I brought him here. Bryce was all attention now. For once he was devoting all his faculties to tense and absorbed concentration on what another man could tell, leaving reflections and conclusions on what he heard until all had been told. "I brought him here," repeated Harker. "I told him I'd been retired and was living here, as he saw, alone. I asked him no questions about himself. I could see he was a well-dressed, apparently well-to-do man. And presently he began to tell me about himself. He said that after he'd finished his term he left England, and for some time travelled in Canada and the United States, and had gone then on to New Zealand and afterwards to Australia, where he'd settled down and begun speculating in wool. I said I hoped he'd done well. Yes, he said, he'd done very nicely. And then he gave me a quiet dig in the ribs. "I'll tell you one thing I've done, Harker," he said. "You were very polite and considerate to me when I'd my trouble, so I don't mind telling you. I paid the bank every penny of that money they lost through my foolishness at that time. Every penny, 4 years ago, with interest, and I've got their receipt." "Delighted to hear it, Mr. Is it the same name still?" I said. "My name ever since I left England," he said, giving me a look, "is Braden, John Braden. Yes," he went on, "I paid 'em, though I never had 1 penny of the money I was fool enough to take for the time being. Not 1 halfpenny." "Who had it, Mr. Braden?" I asked him, thinking he'd perhaps tell after all that time. "Never mind, my lad," he answered. "It'll come out yet. Never mind that now. I'll tell you why I wanted to see you. The fact is, I've only been a few hours in England, so to speak, but I'd thought of you and wondered where I could get hold of you. You're the only man of your profession I ever met, you see," he added with a laugh, "and I want a bit of help in that way." "Well, Mr. Braden," I said, "I've retired, but if it's an easy job—" "It's one you can do, easy enough," he said. "It's just this. I met a man in Australia who's extremely anxious to get some news of another man named Falconer Wraye, who hails from Barthorpe in Leicestershire. I promised to make inquiries for him. Now, I have strong reasons why I don't want to go near Barthorpe. Barthorpe has unpleasant memories and associations for me, and I don't want to be seen there. But this thing's got to be personal investigation. Will you go here for me? I'll make it worth your while. All you've got to do," he went on, "is to go there, see the police authorities, town officials, anybody that knows the place, and ask them if they can tell you anything of one Falconer Wraye, who was at one time a small estate agent in Barthorpe, left the place about 17 years ago, maybe 18, and is believed to have recently gone back to the neighbourhood. That's all. Get what information you can, and write it to me, care of my bankers in London. Give me a sheet of paper, and I'll put down particulars for you." Harker paused at this point, and nodded his head at the old bureau which stood in a corner of his room. "The sheet of paper's there," he said. "It's got on it, in his writing, a brief memorandum of what he wanted and the address of his bankers. When he'd given it to me, he put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a purse, in which I could see he was carrying plenty of money. He took out some notes. 'Here's £25 on account, Harker,' he said. 'You might have to spend a bit. Don't be afraid. Plenty more where that comes from. You'll do it soon?' he asked. 'Yes, I'll do it, Mr. Braden,' I answered. 'It'll be a bit of a holiday for me.' 'That's all right,' he said. 'I'm delighted I came across you.' 'Well, you couldn't be more delighted than I was surprised,' I said. 'I never thought to see you in Rochester. What brought you here, if one may ask? Sightseeing?' He laughed at that, and he pulled out his purse again. 'I'll show you something, a secret,' he said, and he took a bit of folded paper out of his purse. 'What do you make of that?' he asked. 'Can you read Latin?' 'No, except a word or two,' I said, 'but I know a man who can.' 'Ah, never mind,' said he. 'I know enough Latin for this, and it's a secret. However, it won't be a secret long, and you'll hear all about it.' And with that he put the bit of paper in his purse again, and we began talking about other matters, and before long he said he'd promised to have a chat with a gentleman at the Mitre, whom he'd come along with in the train, and away he went, saying he'd see me before he left the town." "Did he say how long he was going to stop here?" asked Bryce. 2 or 3 days, replied Harker. "Did he mention Ransford?" inquired Bryce. "Never," said Harker. "Did he make any reference to his wife and children?" "Not the slightest." "Nor to the hint that his counsel threw out at the trial?" "Never referred to that time except in the way I told you, that he hadn't a penny of the money himself, and that he'd himself refunded it." Bryce meditated a while. He was somewhat puzzled by certain points in the old detective's story, and he saw that there was much more mystery in the Braden affair than he had at first believed. "Well," he asked after a while, "did you see him again?" "Not alive," replied Harker. "I saw him dead, and I held my tongue, and have held it. But something happened that day. After I heard of the accident, I went into the Crown and Cushion Tavern. The fact was, I went to get a taste of whiskey, for the news had upset me. And in that long bar of theirs, I saw a man whom I knew for a fact to have been a fellow convict of Brake's, name of Glassdale, forgery. He got the same sentence that Brake got, about the same time, was in the same convict prison with Brake, and he and Brake would be released about the same date. There was no doubt about his identity. I never forget a face, even after 30 years I'd tell one. I saw him in that bar before he saw me, and I took a careful look at him. He, too, like Brake, was very well dressed and very prosperous-looking. He turned as he set down his glass and caught sight of me, and he knew me. Mind you, he'd been through my hands in times past, and he instantly moved to a side door and vanished. I went out and looked up and down. He'd gone. I found out afterwards, by a little quiet inquiry, that he'd gone straight to the station, boarded the first train, there was one just giving out to the junction, and left the city. But I can lay hands on him." "You've kept this quiet, too?" asked Bryce. "Just so. I've my own game to play," replied Harker. "This talk with you is part of it. You come in now. I'll tell you why presently. But first, as you know, I went to Barthorpe. For though Brake was dead, I felt I must go, for this reason. I was certain that he wanted that information for himself. The man in Australia was a fiction. I went then, and learned nothing, except that this Falconer Wraye had been, as Brake said, a Barthorpe man years ago. He'd left the town 18 years since. Nobody knew anything about him. so I came home. And now then, Doctor, your turn. What were you after down there at Barthorpe?" Bryce meditated his answer for a good 5 minutes. He had always intended to play the game off his own bat, but he had heard and seen enough since entering Harker's little room to know that he was in company with an intellect which was keener and more subtle than his, and that it would be all to his advantage to go in with the man who had vast and deep experience. And so he made a clean breast of all he had done in the way of investigation, leaving his motive completely aside. "You've got a theory, of course," observed Harker, after listening quietly to all that Bryce could tell. "Naturally you have. You couldn't accumulate all that without getting one." "Well," admitted Bryce, "honestly, I can't say that I have. But I can see what theory there might be. This, that Ransford was the man who deceived Brake, that he ran away with Brake's wife, that she's dead, and that he's brought up the children in ignorance of all that, and therefore—" "And therefore," interrupted Harker with a smile, "that when he and Brake met, as you seem to think they did, Ransford flung Brake through that open doorway, that Collishaw witnessed it, that Ransford found out about Collishaw, and that Collishaw has been poisoned by Ransford, eh?" "That's a theory that seems to be supported by facts," said Bryce. "It's a theory that would doubtless suit men like Mitchington," said the old detective with another smile. "But not me, sir. Mind you, I don't say there isn't something in it. There's doubtless a lot. But the mystery's a lot thicker than just that. And Brake didn't come here to find Ransford. He came because of the secret in that scrap of paper. And as you've got it, Doctor, out with it." Bryce saw no reason for concealment, and producing the scrap of paper, laid it on the table between himself and his host. Harker peered inquisitively at it. "Latin," he said. "You can read it, of course. What does it say?" Bryce repeated a literal translation. "I've found the place," he added. "I found it this morning. Now what do you suppose this means?" Harker was looking hard at the 2 lines of writing. "That's a big question, Doctor," he answered. "But I'll go so far as to say this. When we found out what it does mean, we shall know a lot more than we know now." End of chapter 14.
The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 15. The Double Offer. Bryce, who was deriving a considerable and peculiar pleasure from his secret interview with the old detective, smiled at Harker's last remark. "That's a bit of a platitude, isn't it?" he suggested. "Of course we shall know a lot more, when we do know a lot more." "I set store by platitudes, sir," retorted Harker. "You can't repeat an established platitude too often. It's got the hallmark of good use on it. But now, till we do know more, you've no doubt been thinking a lot about this matter, Dr. Bryce. Hasn't it struck you that there's one feature in connection with Brake or Braden's visit to Wrychester to which nobody's given any particular attention up to now, so far as we know at any rate?" "What?" demanded Bryce. "This," replied Harker. "Why did he wish to see the Duke of Saxonsteade? He certainly did want to see him, and as soon as possible. You'll remember that his Grace was questioned about that at the inquest, and could give no explanation. He knew nothing of Brake, and couldn't suggest any reason why Brake should wish to have an interview with him. But I can." "You?" exclaimed Bryce. "I," answered Harker. "And it's this. I spoke just now of that man Glassdale. Now, you, of course, have no knowledge of him, and as you don't keep yourself posted in criminal history, you don't know what his offence was." "You said forgery?" replied Bryce. "Just so. Forgery," assented Harker. "And the signature that he forged was the Duke of Saxonsteade's. As a matter of fact, he was the Duke's London estate agent. He got wrong somehow, and he forged the Duke's name to a cheque. Now, then, considering who Glassdale is, and that he was certainly a fellow-convict of Brake's, and that I myself saw him here in Wrychester on the day of Brake's death, what's the conclusion to be drawn? That Brake wanted to see the Duke on some business of Glassdale's, without a doubt. It may have been that he and Glassdale wanted to visit the Duke together." Bryce silently considered this suggestion for a while. "You said just now that Glassdale could be traced," he remarked at last. "Traced? Yes," replied Harker, "so long as he's in England." "Why not set about it?" suggested Bryce. "Not yet," said Harker. "There's things to do before that. And the first thing is, let's get to know what the mystery of that scrap of paper is. You say you've found Richard Jenkins's tomb? Very well. Then the thing to do is to find out if anything is hidden there. Try it tomorrow night. Better go yourself after dark. If you find anything, let me know. And then we can decide on a next step. But between now and then there'll be the inquest on this man Collishaw. And about that, a word in your ear. Say as little as ever you can. After all, you know nothing beyond what you saw. And we mustn't meet and talk in public. After you've done that bit of exploring in Paradise tomorrow night, come round here and we'll consider matters." There was little that Bryce could say or could be asked to say at the inquest on the Mason's labourer next morning. Public interest and excitement was as keen about Collishaw's mysterious death as about Braden's, for it was already rumoured throughout the town that if Braden had not met with his death when he came to Wrychester, Collishaw would still be alive. The coroner's court was once more packed. Once more there was the same atmosphere of mystery. But the proceedings were of a very different nature to those which had attended the inquest on Braden. The foreman under whose orders Collishaw had been working gave particulars of the dead man's work on the morning of his death. He had been instructed to clear away an accumulation of rubbish which had gathered at the foot of the south wall of the nave in consequence of some recent repairs to the masonry. There was a full day's work before him. All day he would be in and out of Paradise with his barrow, wheeling away the rubbish he gathered up. The foreman had looked in on him once or twice. He had seen him just before noon, when he appeared to be in his usual health. He had made no complaint, at any rate. Asked if he had happened to notice where Collishaw had set down his dinner-basket and his tin bottle while he worked, he replied that it so happened that he had. He remembered seeing both bottle and basket and the man's jacket deposited on one of the box tombs, under a certain yew tree, which he could point out if necessary. Bryce's account of his finding of Collishaw amounted to no more than a bare recital of facts, nor was much time spent in questioning the two doctors who had conducted the post-mortem examination. Their evidence, terse and particular, referred solely to the cause of death. The man had been poisoned by a dose of hydrocyanic acid, which, in their opinion, had been taken only a few minutes before his body was discovered by Dr. Bryce. It had probably been a dose which would cause instantaneous death. There were no traces of the poison in the remains of his dinner, nor in the liquid in his tin bottle, which was old tea. But of the cause of his sudden death there was no more doubt than of the effects. Ransford had been in the court from the outset of the proceedings, and when the medical evidence had been given, he was called. Bryce, watching him narrowly, saw that he was suffering from repressed excitement, and that excitement was as much due to anger as to anything else. His face was set and stern, and he looked at the coroner with an expression which portended something not precisely clear at that moment. Bryce, trying to analyze it, said to himself that he shouldn't be surprised if a scene followed. Ransford looked like a man who is bursting to say something in no unmistakable fashion. But at first he answered the questions put to him calmly and decisively. "When this man's clothing was searched," observed the coroner, "a box of pills was found, Dr. Ransford, on which your writing appears. Had you been attending him professionally?" "Yes," replied Ransford, "both Collishaw and his wife. Or rather, to be exact, I had been in attendance on the wife for some weeks. A day or two before his death, Collishaw complained to me of indigestion following on his meals. I gave him some digestive pills, the pills you speak of, no doubt." "These?" asked the coroner, passing over the box which Mitchington had found. "Precisely," agreed Ransford. "That, at any rate, is the box, and I suppose those to be the pills." "You made them up yourself?" inquired the coroner. "I did. I dispense all my own medicines." "Is it possible that the poison we have heard of just now could get into one of these pills by accident?" "Utterly impossible, under my hands at any rate," answered Ransford. "Still, I suppose it could have been administered in a pill," suggested the coroner. "It might," agreed Ransford. "But," he added, with a significant glance at the medical men who had just given evidence, "it was not so administered in this case, as the previous witnesses very well know." The coroner looked round him and waited a moment. "You are at liberty to explain that last remark," he said at last. "That is, if you wish to do so." "Certainly," answered Ransford with alacrity. "Those pills are, as you will observe, coated, and the man would swallow them whole immediately after his food. Now it would take some little time for a pill to dissolve, to disintegrate, to be digested. If Collishaw took one of my pills as soon as he had eaten his dinner, according to instructions, and if poison had been in that pill, he would not have died at once, as he evidently did. Death would probably have been delayed some little time, until the pill had dissolved. But according to the evidence you have had before you, he died quite suddenly while eating his dinner, or immediately after it. I am not legally represented here. I don't consider it at all necessary. But I ask you to recall Dr. Coates and to put this question to him. Did he find one of those digestive pills in this man's stomach?" The coroner turned somewhat dubiously to the two doctors who had performed the autopsy. But before he could speak, the superintendent of police rose and began to whisper to him, and after a conversation between them, he looked round at the jury, every member of which had evidently been much struck by Ransford's suggestion. "At this stage," he said, "it will be necessary to adjourn. I shall adjourn the inquiry for a week, gentlemen. You will—" Ransford, still standing in the witness-box, suddenly lost control of himself. He uttered a sharp exclamation and smote the ledge before him smartly with his open hand. "I protest against that!" he said vehemently. "Emphatically I protest! You, first of all, make a suggestion which tells against me. Then, when I demand that a question shall be put which is of immense importance to my interests, you close down the inquiry, even if only for the moment. That is grossly unfair and unjust." "You are mistaken," said the coroner. "At the adjourned inquiry the two medical men can be recalled, and you will have the opportunity, or your solicitor will have, of asking any questions you like for the present." "For the present you have me under suspicion," interrupted Ransford hotly. "You know it. I say this with due respect to your office, as well as I do. Suspicion is rife in the city against me. Rumour is being spread secretly, and, I am certain, from the police, who ought to know better. And I will not be silenced, Mr. Coroner. I take this public opportunity, as I am on oath, of saying that I know nothing whatever of the causes of the deaths of either Collishaw or of Braden, upon my solemn oath." "The inquest is adjourned to this day week," said the coroner quietly. Ransford suddenly stepped down from the witness-box, and without word or glance at anyone there, walked with set face and determined look out of the court, and the excited spectators, gathering into groups, immediately began to discuss his vigorous outburst and to take sides for and against him. Bryce, judging it advisable to keep away from Mitchington just then, and for similar reasons keeping away from Harker also, went out of the crowded building alone, to be joined in the street outside by Sackville Bonham, whom he had noticed in court, in company with his stepfather, Mr. Folliot. Folliot, Bryce had observed, had stopped behind, exchanging some conversation with the coroner. Sackville came up to Bryce with a knowing shake of the head. He was one of those very young men who have a habit of suggesting that their fund of knowledge is extensive and peculiar, and Bryce waited for a manifestation. "Queer business, all that, Bryce," observed Sackville confidentially. "Of course Ransford is a perfect ass." "Think so?" remarked Bryce, with an inflection which suggested that Sackville's opinion on anything was as valuable as the Attorney General's. "That's how it strikes you, is it?" "Impossible that it could strike one in any other way, you know," answered Sackville with fine and lofty superiority. "Ransford should have taken immediate steps to clear himself of any suspicion. It's ridiculous, considering his position, guardian to Miss Bewery, for instance, that he should allow such rumours to circulate. By God, sir, if it had been me, I'd have stopped 'em before they left the parish pump." "Ah?" said Bryce. "And how?" "Made an example of somebody," replied Sackville with emphasis. "I believe there's law in this country, isn't there? Law against libel and slander and that sort of thing, eh? Oh, yes." "I've not been much time for that yet," remarked Bryce. "Piles of time," retorted Sackville, swinging his stick vigorously. "No, sir, Ransford is an ass. However, if a man won't do things for himself, well, his friends must do something for him. Ransford, of course, must be pulled, dragged out of this infernal hole. Of course he's suspected. But my stepfather, he's going to take a hand. And my stepfather, Bryce, is a devilish cute old hand at a game of this sort." "Nobody doubts Mr. Folliot's abilities, I'm sure," said Bryce. "But you don't mind saying, how is he going to take a hand?" "Stir things toward a clearing up," announced Sackville promptly. "Have the whole thing gone into, thoroughly. There are matters that haven't been touched on yet. You'll see, my boy." "Glad to hear it," said Bryce. "But why should Mr. Folliot be so particular about clearing Ransford?" Sackville swung his stick, and pulled up his collar, and jerked his nose a trifle higher. "Oh, well," he said, "of course it's a pretty well understood thing, don't you know, between myself and Miss Bewery, you know. And of course we couldn't have any suspicions attaching to her guardian, could we now? Family interest, don't you know, Caesar's wife and all that sort of thing, eh?" "I see," answered Bryce quietly. "Sort of family arrangement. With Ransford's consent and knowledge, of course." "Ransford won't even be consulted," said Sackville airily. "My stepfather, sharp man that, Bryce. He'll do things in his own fashion. You look out for sudden revelations." "I will," replied Bryce. "Bye-bye." He turned off to his rooms, wondering how much of truth there was in the fatuous Sackville's remarks, and was there some mystery still undreamt of by himself and Harker? There might be. He was still under the influence of Ransford's indignant and dramatic assertion of his innocence. Would Ransford have allowed himself an outburst of that sort if he had not been, as he said, utterly ignorant of the immediate cause of Braden's death? Now Bryce, all through, was calculating, for his own purposes, on Ransford's share, full or partial, in that death. If Ransford really knew nothing whatever about it, where did his, Bryce's, theory come in? And how would his present machinations result? And more, if Ransford's assertion were true, and if Varner's story of the hand, seen for an instant in the archway, were also true, and Varner was persisting in it, then who was the man who flung Braden to his death that morning? He realized that, instead of straightening out, things were becoming more and more complicated. But he realized something else. On the surface, there was a strong case of suspicion against Ransford. It had been suggested that very morning before a coroner and his jury. It would grow. The police were already permeated with suspicion and distrust. Would it not pay him, Bryce, to encourage, to help it? He had his own score to pay off against Ransford. He had his own schemes as regards Mary Bewery. Anyway, he was not going to share in any attempts to clear the man who had bundled him out of his house unceremoniously. He would bide his time. And in the meantime there were other things to be done, one of them that very night. But before Bryce could engage in his secret task of excavating a small portion of paradise in the rear of Richard Jenkins's tomb, another strange development came. As the dark fell over the old city that night, and he was thinking of setting out on his mission, Mitchington came in, carrying 2 sheets of paper, obviously damp from the press, in his hand. He looked at Bryce with an expression of wonder. "Here's a queer go," he said. "I can't make this out at all. Look at these big handbills, but perhaps you've seen 'em. They're being posted all over the city. We've had a bundle of 'em thrown in on us." "I haven't been out since lunch," remarked Bryce. "What are they?" Mitchington spread out the 2 papers on the table, pointing from one to the other. "You see," he said, £500 reward, £1,000 reward, and both out at the same time from different sources." "What sources?" asked Bryce, bending over the bills. "Ah, I see. One signed by Phipps and Maynard, the other by Beechcroft. Odd, certainly." "Odd!" exclaimed Mitchington. "I should think so. But do you see, Doctor, that one, 500 reward, is offered for information of any nature relative to the deaths of John Braden and James Collishaw, both or either. That amount will be paid for satisfactory information by Phipps and Maynard. And Phipps and Maynard are Ransford's solicitors. That bill, sir, comes from him. And now the other, The £1,000 one that offers the reward to anyone who can give definite information as to the circumstances attending the death of John Braden, to be paid by Mr. Beechcroft. And he's Mr. Folliot's solicitor. So that comes from Mr. Folliot. What has he to do with it? And are these two putting their heads together? Or are these bills quite independent of each other? Hang me if I understand it. Bryce read and reread the contents of the two bills, and then he thought for a while before speaking. Well, he said at last, there's probably this in it. The Folliots are very wealthy people. Mrs. Folliot, it's pretty well known, wants her son to marry Miss Bewery, Dr. Ransford's ward. Probably she doesn't wish any suspicion to hang over the family. That's all I can suggest. In the other case, Ransford wants to clear himself. For don't forget this, Mitchington. Somewhere, somebody may know something. Only something. But that something might clear Ransford of the suspicion that's undoubtedly been cast upon him. If you're thinking to get a strong case against Ransford, you've got your work set. He gave your theory a nasty knock this morning by his few words about the pill. Did Coates and Everest find a pill now? Not at liberty to say, sir, answered Mitchington. At present, anyway. I dislike these private offers of reward. It means that those who make 'em get hold of information which is kept back from us, do you see? They're inconvenient. Then he went away, and Bryce, after waiting a while, until night had settled down, slipped quietly out of the house, and set off for the gloom of paradise. End of chapter 15.